Activity 67 is an important one, kind of summing up a lot of what we've been studying about constitutional change. And it begins, first of all, with this provocative statement by law professor Lino Graglia, who says the first and most important thing to know about American constitutional law is that it has virtually nothing to do with the Constitution. In other words, when lawyers go to study constitutional law, all they're learning is what the Supreme Court has said about the Constitution and getting straight on that. There's not an attempt to go and look at the Constitution, what it actually says, what the people who ratified it and proposed it said about it, to get clear on what it actually does. And so they're missing perhaps what the Constitution actually means. The definitions here are going to be important for understanding the rest of the activity. When I use the term judicial activism, and I think this is the best understanding I've seen of this term, what we mean is when judges consider a case and make a ruling, they take the Constitution or the law and they give the words a new and different meaning than they had to the people who ratified it. Judicial restraint is when judges say, well, we don't have the authority to change the meaning of the Constitution. We have to make a ruling based on what the Constitution is saying and as it was understood by the people who ratified it. So if the Supreme Court takes the words of the 14th Amendment, which protect life, liberty, and property, and say, well, it also guarantees personal liberties, because that word liberty, we're going to say it means personal liberties, and then they take power over that. That is an example of judicial activism. Judicial restraint would require judges to say, although we see some things happening in the state that we're not crazy about, we think are unjust or whatever, we don't have the authority to do anything about it. So we're not going to get involved in that situation. These terms don't have anything to do with how frequently judges get involved in situations. It just has to do with whether or not they abide by the words of the Constitution as written, or they feel free to give the meaning new words. Give the words new meanings. Letter A is very important for your paper, so let's look at this fairly closely. Jefferson is in a situation where he thinks the federal government needs more power. This quotation has to do with the purchase of Louisiana Purchase, that Jefferson was being very concerned that it wasn't clear how the federal government should go about buying a piece of land like this. I think most people would say it's by the treaty process, and that's what it was done by. But he was concerned and was struggling over that. So what he said in a letter is, I'd rather ask an enlargement of power from the nation where it is found necessary than to assume it by a construction which would make our powers boundless. So what he's saying is, if I think the federal government needs more power, anyone thinks the federal government needs more power, it has to be by amendment. That's what he means by asking the nation for an enlargement of power. He'd rather go that route than for the federal government to just take power by giving new meanings to the words. That's what he means by a construction which would make our powers boundless. Construction means interpretation. So if the federal government can take more power just by giving a new and different meaning to the words of the Constitution, such as the word liberty in the 14th Amendment, then the powers of the powers of the federal government are boundless. There's no limit. If the federal government can give itself more power without an amendment, just by giving new meanings to the words, whether it's the Commerce Clause, the General Welfare Clause, the Necessary and Proper Clause, or the word liberty in the 14th Amendment, then the power of the federal government is really unlimited. And the key thing I want you to see here is then, if that happens, then constitutionally limited government decreases. So something else might happen that you think is good, but it always results in a loss of liberty in the sense of constitutionally limited government, because the federal government, when it does this, goes beyond its limits. Jefferson goes on to say, our peculiar security is in possession of a written constitution, let's not make it a blank paper by construction. If the Constitution means whatever the federal government says it means, it might as well be a blank piece of paper, meaning whatever the federal government says it means. But as Jefferson says in another place, what's great about the U.S. is we have a written Constitution that anybody can read and see what it says, and it means what it says, not whatever the Supreme Court happens to want it to say at any given moment. If you let it be a blank piece of paper, then you have unlimited government. You don't have a constitution. That's his point. You don't really have a constitution. And you're subject to all the dangers of not having a constitution. Notice also that Jefferson says, look, we enumerate powers to the federal government in the U.S. Constitution. I'm sure that enumeration is defective. He does not believe that the Constitution is perfect. He is certain that it's not perfect. It's a human work. It's going to need improvement. But, as he says, let us go on then perfecting it by adding, by way of amendment to the Constitution, those powers which time and trial show are still wanting. So if someone was to say to Thomas Jefferson now, if he was somehow able to speak with us, and someone said, you know, Thomas Jefferson, the U.S. Constitution was written over 200 years ago. A lot has happened since then. We have to keep it up to date. He would say, yes, definitely, that's true. But do it by amendment. Don't just let the federal government take power by giving new meanings to the words of the Constitution, because you will lose your liberty if you let that happen. So Jefferson believes in judicial restraint as being essential to liberty. You can't let the federal government, any part of it, give new meanings to the words. In letter B, Washington is saying the same thing. The Constitution, which at any time exists, has to be sacredly obligatory upon all. So if this is what the 14th Amendment does, that's what it does, and the Supreme Court has to respect that as something sacred. And again, it's sacred because it's the thing that protects our God-given rights, life, liberty, and property. So he says it can be changed, but it has to be changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, by an amendment. And the basis of our political system is the right of the people to alter their constitution. So if the Supreme Court or any part of the federal government bypasses that and just takes more power without an amendment, that takes away the basis of our political system. And